Court date set for 60 days from now. We need to move fast. I typed back a single word. Understood. Then I opened my email and sent Delaney everything I had. The photos, the scans of the agreement, the corporate records I'd pulled online. At the bottom I wrote, "Find out who Fiona Kellerman answers to. Find out what they're really after and find out if my father's death was an accident." I hit send and set the phone down. Outside, the land was silent, but I could feel the pressure building like a storm, gathering just over the horizon. They'd made their first real move tonight. Now it was my turn. The county commission met every second Thursday in a room that smelled like old wood and stale coffee. I'd filed a request to speak 3 days earlier, using the public comment period to put everything on record. Monroe thought it was a risk going public. Before we had all the evidence could backfire, he'd said, but I was done playing defense. If Wind River Resources wanted a quiet legal fight, buried in motions and sealed exhibits, I was going to drag it into the light. The meeting room filled up slowly. Locals who came for the zoning discussions, a couple of reporters from the county paper, and in the back row, Fiona Kellerman. She sat alone dressed in the same black suit, her expression unreadable. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. The commission chair, Virgil Cormarmac, was a heavy man in his 60s with a face that had spent too many years turning red at public meetings. He'd bang the gavel at 7 sharp and work through the agenda with bureaucratic efficiency. Zoning variance road maintenance budgets, a proposal for a new fire station. Then he reached my name. Public comment Cole Branson regarding property dispute in Section 12. Mr. Branson, you have 5 minutes. I stood and walked to the podium, a folder tucked under my arm. The room went quiet. I could feel Kellerman watching from the back. I didn't look at her. I looked at Cormarmac. My name is Cole Branson, I said. My family has owned 640 acres in Section 12 Township, 32 North since 1952. My father, Travis Branson, lived on that land for 37 years. He paid taxes. He maintained the property. He died there 5 years ago. Now, a corporation called Wind River Resources is claiming that land was never ours, that it was deed by mistake, that the federal government wants it back. I opened the folder and pulled out the photocopy of the 1985 agreement. This is a confidential agreement signed by a deputy director of the Bureau of Land Management in October 1985. It acknowledges a survey error and grants my family permanent ownership of that land in exchange for our silence. The BLM knew about the mistake for nearly 40 years and did nothing until now. I held the document up, turning it toward the audience. A camera flashed. One of the reporters leaned forward, scribbling notes. Cormarmac's face went from neutral to dark red in the span of 3 seconds. Mr. Branson, he said, his voice tight. This commission has no jurisdiction over federal land disputes. You need to take this up with the appropriate agencies. I know that, Commissioner, I said. But Wind River Resources has been surveying my property without permission. They've been conducting surveillance. Someone broke into my home 4 days ago and destroyed it. And when I look at who's funding Wind River Resources, I find shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands with ties to foreign mining interests. So, I'm asking this commission publicly whether anyone here has had contact with Wind River Resources, whether any campaign contributions or consulting fees, some fees have changed hands. Because this isn't just about my land, it's about who gets to decide what happens to resources in this county. Cormac slammed the gavel down. "You are out of order, Mr. Branson. You're making accusations without evidence. I suggest you sit down before I have you removed." I stayed at the podium. "The evidence is being compiled," I said, "and it will be submitted to the court in the quiet title hearing. But I wanted the people of this county to know what's happening on land that's been in my family for 3 generations." I sat down. The room buzzed with low conversation. Kellerman stood and walked out without a word, her heels sharp on the tile floor. Cormac gave the meeting back to order, his jaw clenched. "We will not entertain conspiracy theories in this chamber," he said. The meeting adjourned. He stood and left through the side door before anyone could ask questions. Monroe leaned over. "That was bold," he said, quietly. "Maybe too bold. We'll see," I said. The fallout came 2 days later. The county paper ran a front-page story with the headline, "Local Man Claims Federal Land Conspiracy." But the article wasn't balanced. It quoted an anonymous source calling me paranoid and financially desperate. It mentioned that I'd left my geology career under unclear circumstances, implying instability. It suggested my father had indeed been in debt when he died, though that was a lie. He'd owned the land outright. No mortgage, no liens. By the afternoon, the story had been picked up by a statewide news blog with an even worse headline: "Branson family heir spreads conspiracy theories about federal government." The comment sections are filled with people calling me a liar, a fraud, a lunatic. Someone posted my phone number. I started getting calls from strangers, some curious, most hostile. Monroe called at noon. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," he said. "Someone fed that story to the paper. Someone with access and resources." No. I said I was sitting in the cabin watching another black SUV roll past on the access road. "Third one today. They're trying to isolate me. Make me look crazy so nobody believes the evidence when it comes out." Monroe was silent for a moment. "Cole," he said carefully, "are you sure you want to keep pushing this? These people are playing hardball. They'll destroy your reputation. They'll tie you up in court for years." I looked out at the land, the fence line my father had died maintaining. "I'm sure," I said. Monroe sighed. "Then we fight. I'll draft a defamation claim against the paper in Kellerman. And I'm calling in a favor. There's a trial attorney in Jackson, Ramona Keyes. She's a shark. If anyone can take on Wind River Resources in court, it's her." "Set up the meeting," I said. That night, Delaney called. "I've got something," she said. "Wind River Resources is owned by a holding company in Grand Cayman, which is owned by another shell in Singapore, which leads back to a Chinese rare earth mining conglomerate. They have been buying up mineral rights across Wyoming for 5 years. Your land is the biggest prize. The deposits there could be worth $500 million, maybe more. Fiona Kellerman isn't just their lawyer. She's the one running the acquisition campaign. And here's the kicker. She's been making payments to Virgil Cormac's campaign fund since 2018. $50,000 total funneled through a PAC." I sat up. "Can you prove it?" "Already did," Delaney said. "Wire transfers, FEC filings, the whole chain. I'm sending you the files now." "And Cole, there's one more thing. I checked the medical examiner's report on your father. No full toxicology screen. No autopsy. They ruled it a heart attack, based on his medical history, but there were surveillance logs. Someone was watching your father's property in October 2019, 3 weeks before he died." I closed my eyes. The pieces falling into place. Send me everything I said. Monroe and I are meeting with a trial attorney tomorrow. We're going to bury them, good, Delaney said, because they're not going to stop. You know that, right? I know, I said. Neither am I. Delaney sent the files at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee going cold. The email subject line read, "Born found." I opened it and scanned the attachments. Everett Thornton, 76 years old, retired from the BLM in 2015, living in a gated community outside Scottsdale. Delaney had included his phone number, his address, and a note at the bottom. He agreed to talk. Off the record, he's scared. Wants immunity if this goes criminal. I called her immediately. How did you find him? I asked. Public records, pension databases, she said. He's not hiding, just keeping quiet. But when I mentioned your father's name, he went silent for 30 seconds. Then he said he had been waiting for this call. He'll meet you tomorrow, 2 p.m. coffee shop called Desert Bloom on East Camelback. Come alone. I booked a flight out of Jackson that left at 6 a.m. Monroe wanted to come, but I told him to stay and prep the case with a trial attorney. This was something I needed to hear firsthand. The flight was 2 hours, the rental car, another 40 minutes through Phoenix traffic. The coffee shop sat at a strip mall between a nail salon and a vitamin store, the kind of place retirees use for mid-morning meetups. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a table near the back. Thornton walked in at exactly 2 p.m. He was tall, stooped, with white hair and liver spots on his hands. He wore a polo shirt and khakis, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room before he sat down across from me. You look like Travis, he said. Same build, same way of sitting. I ordered us both coffee. Neither of us touched it. I signed that agreement to save your father, Thornton said without preamble. The BLM had screwed up the original land patent in '52. Gave away 640 acres. That should have stayed federal. Nobody noticed for 30 years because nobody cared. It was empty range land. Worthless. Then in '84, we started doing mineral surveys across Wyoming. New technology, better imaging. And we found rare earth deposits on the Branson property. Big ones. Neodymium, prosium, europium, elements worth billions if extracted, right? Suddenly that mistake mattered. The agency wanted the land back quietly. No publicity, no lawsuits. Just fix it and move on. So they sent me. I was the deputy director. It was my job to clean up messes. I looked at him, trying to keep my voice level. So you threatened my father, took his land. Thornton shook his head. No, I gave him a choice. I could have condemned the property, seized it under eminent domain, dragged him through federal court for years until he had nothing left. Or I could let him keep it, tax-free in perpetuity, if he stayed quiet about the deposits. He chose to keep it. We both signed. I filed the agreement in a classified archive and walked away. Your father got to live on his land. The BLM avoided a scandal. Everyone won. Except now someone wants to break that agreement, I said. Thornton nodded slowly. When your father called me in October 2019, he said people were following him, watching the property, taking photos. He asked if the BLM had sent them. I told him no. The BLM had moved on decades ago. But I knew what it meant. Someone else had found out about the deposits. Someone with money and patience. I told him to be careful, to keep records, to call me if anything escalated. 3 weeks later, he was dead. I sat back, the coffee shop noise fading into background static. You think he was killed? Thornton looked down at his hands. I think a healthy man doesn't drop dead from a heart attack while fixing a fence, unless there's a reason. I think the medical examiner in Sublette County didn't look very hard because nobody asked him to. And I think if someone wanted your father gone, they had 3 weeks to make it happen. I pulled out my phone and showed him the surveillance logs Delaney had sent. October 2019, 3 weeks of documented activity near my father's property, vehicles, personnel, equipment. Thornton studied the screen, his face going pale. That's not BLM, he said. That's private contractors. Corporate, probably hired through a shell company, so there's no direct link. If they were watching him that closely, they knew his routines. They knew he was alone. They knew when to move. I felt something cold and finally settled in my chest. Will you testify to this? I asked in court publicly. Thor was quiet for a long time. If I testify, he said finally, I'm admitting I signed an illegal agreement. I'm admitting the BLM buried a mistake that cost taxpayers millions. I could be charged, disbarred, lose my pension, but if I don't testify, your father's death means nothing. And whoever killed him gets the land anyway. He looked up, meeting my eyes. I'll do it. I'll provide an affidavit. I'll testify if it goes to trial. But you need to understand something, Cole. The people behind this don't care about the law. They care about the deposits. $500 million in rare earth elements. They'll do whatever it takes to get them. Your father stood in their way. Now you're standing in their way. You need to be ready for what comes next. I am, I said. Thornton nodded and stood. I'll send the affidavit to your attorney by the end of the week. And Cole. He paused at the table. Your father was a better man then. I was. He kept his word even when it cost him everything. Don't let them take that away from him. I won't, I said. The flight back to Jackson left at 6 p.m. I sat by the window, staring out at the desert below, thinking about my father. Alone on that land, watching headlights in the dark. Knowing something was coming, but not knowing when. I pulled out my phone and called Delaney. I need you to get the medical examiner's full file on my father, I said. Everything. Notes, photos, preliminary reports, and I need you to find out if there's any way to request a retroactive toxicology screen. She was quiet for a moment. Cole, she said gently. It's been 5 years. If there was something in his system, it's gone now. The body was cremated. I know, I said, but I need to try. Understood, she said. I'll see what I can do. I hung up and closed my eyes. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in reds and golds. My father used to say that Wyoming sunsets were the only thing worth stopping for. Now I understand. He'd been stopping there to make sure no one was coming to make sure he had one more day. When I landed in Jackson, Monroe was waiting at the terminal. We need to talk, he said. The trial attorney is in. Ramona Keys. She read everything. She thinks we have a case. A strong one. Good, I said. Because we're not just fighting for the land anymore. We're fighting for the truth. Ramona Keys worked out of a glass office in Jackson with a view of the Tetons and a reputation for taking down corporations. Twice her size. She was 45, sharp-featured with gray streaks in her dark hair and a handshake that felt like a challenge. Monroe and I sat across from her while she read through the files Delaney had compiled. Email chains between Kellerman and Cormarmac discussing the Branson problem. Wire transfers from Wind River Resources flowing into a political action committee that funded Cormarmac's last two campaigns. Surveillance logs showing consistent monitoring of my father's property in the weeks before his death. The 1985 agreement with Thornton's signature. She read it all without speaking, making notes in the margins, her pen moving fast and precise. When she finished, she set the folder down and looked at me. "This is a gold mine," she said. "Conspiracy to defraud, corruption, defamation, possible wrongful death. Wind River Resources thought they could bury this under legal procedure and backroom deals. They were wrong. We're going to hit them with 3 separate civil suits. First, a quiet title action to confirm your ownership beyond any dispute. Second, defamation against the newspaper and Kellerman personally for the smear campaign. Third, a conspiracy claim against Wind River Resources and Cormac for collusion and illegal surveillance. And I'm recommending we file a criminal referral with the FBI for violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. If a Chinese conglomerate is using shell companies to influence local officials and seize American land, that's a federal crime." Monroe leaned forward, his pen poised over his legal pad. "What's our timeline?" he asked. Ramona tapped the folder. "We file everything simultaneously. Maximum impact. The quiet title hearing is already scheduled for 60 days out. We use that as the anchor and build around it. I'll need affidavit from Thornton, from the surveyor, from anyone who can testify to the original agreement and the subsequent threats. Delaney's evidence on the financial ties between Kellerman and Cormarmac is solid, but we need to lock it down with sworn statements. And Cole," she looked at me directly, "you need to be prepared. This is going to be public ugly. They'll come after your credibility, your finances, your personal life. Every mistake you've ever made will end up in a court filing. Can you handle that?" I thought about my father fixing that fence alone in the cold, his hands numb, his breath visible in the October air. "I can handle it," I said. Ramona nodded. "Then let's get to work." Over the next week, Delaney pulled together evidence that would have taken a normal investigator months to compile. She traced the wire transfers through 3 shell companies, cross-referenced them with Federal Election Commission filings, and matched the dates to key decisions Cormarmac had made as county commissioner. Every time Wind River Resources needed a zoning variance or a mineral survey permit, Cormarmac's office approved it within days. The pattern was undeniable. She also found emails between Kellerman and an executive at the Chinese conglomerate discussing acquisition targets in Wyoming. My father's land was listed as high priority, annotated with estimated deposit values and extraction timelines, but the most damning evidence came from the surveillance logs. Delaney had cross-referenced vehicle registrations with security footage from a gas station near my father's property. The same black SUV that had been circling my cabin in recent weeks had been there in October 2019, refueling twice in the span of 10 days. The vehicle was registered to a private security firm based in Denver that specialized in corporate asset protection. When Delaney contacted them under a pretext, they refused to confirm or deny any contracts with Wind River Resources. But their client list obtained through a public records request and an unrelated lawsuit included the same Cayman Islands holding company. The circle was closing. Thornton's affidavit arrived on a Tuesday, notarized and detailed. He described the 1985 survey error, the decision to bury it, the agreement with my father, and his belief that my father's death was not natural. He admitted his own culpability and stated he was willing to testify in open court. The surveyor, now 71 and living in a care facility, provided a shorter affidavit, confirming he'd been ordered to redo the boundary work 3 times, until it produced the result the BLM wanted. Both documents were explosive. Monroe filed them under seal with the court, but we knew they'd become public during the hearing. The question was whether we could control the narrative before Wind River Resources spun it their way. I spent those weeks doing something I hadn't done in 5 years. I went back to geology. I collected soil samples from a dozen locations across the property, ran them through a portable X-ray fluorescence analyzer I borrowed from a former colleague, and confirmed what Thornon had said. The rare earth concentrations were extraordinary. Neodymium oxide at 2,000 parts per million, dysprosium at 300, europium at 150. For context, anything over 500 parts per million for neodymium is considered commercially viable. My father's land wasn't just valuable. It was a strategic asset, the kind that nations went to war over quietly through lawyers and shell companies and men in black SUVs. I documented everything. Photographed the sample sites, logged the coordinates, and sent the data to Ramona. She added it to the evidence file without comment. On the 13th day after the county commission meeting, Monroe, Ramona, and I walked into the Sublette County Courthouse with 3 separate lawsuits ready to file. The clerk's office was quiet, just a few people waiting for traffic hearings. We submitted the paperwork at 9 a.m. Quiet title action, Branson vs. Wind River Resources LLC. Defamation claim, Branson vs. Kellerman and Sublette County Gazette. Conspiracy and fraud, Branson vs. Wind River Resources. Fiona Kellerman and Virgil Cormarmack. The clerk stamped each one, assigned case numbers, and handed us the receipts. By 9:30, Ramona had issued a press release to every news outlet in Wyoming. It included a summary of the claims, copies of the key evidence with sensitive information redacted, and a statement from me. My family's land is being stolen by a foreign corporation using corrupt local officials. This lawsuit will prove it. By noon, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press. By 2 p.m., it was trending online under the hashtag Wyoming Land Grab. By 5 p.m., a national cable news network had called, requesting an interview. Ramona handled the media, keeping me out of the spotlight until the courthouse steps the next morning. That's when I made my only public statement, standing in front of a dozen cameras while Monroe and Ramona flanked me. My father died protecting this land, I said. He kept his word to the government even when it cost him everything. Now the government is letting a foreign company steal what's rightfully mine. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for justice, the rule of law, and I'm asking every American watching this to remember that if they can do it to me, they can do it to you. The response was immediate. Emails, phone calls, letters of support from people across the country who'd fought similar battles against corporations and lost. A few came from people who had won. One email stood out. It was from a retired FBI agent who'd worked white-collar crime in the Rocky Mountain region. He'd seen cases like mine before he wrote foreign entities using shell companies to acquire resource-rich land while corrupting local officials. He offered to review our evidence and provide an expert affidavit if needed. Ramona called him that afternoon. 3 days later, we had another sworn statement added to the file. The pressure was building, and Wind River Resources was about to feel it. The federal district court in Cheyenne was a limestone building that looked like it had been built to intimidate. High ceilings, marble floors, the kind of quiet that made every footstep echo. The quiet title hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Thursday in late July, 2 months after we'd filed the lawsuits.